Peace and life, family. I hope that you are well and happy and whole and all that good stuff. Y'all know I love talking about spirituality and holistic wellness and all things that contribute to healing and our wellness and all that good stuff. Well, today I want to speak specifically about hoodoo. I'm normally talking about, other forms of African spirituality like Ifa, Lukumi, and all that, but I want to focus on an African American religious practice, which is hoodoo. So my intention for this video is to explain the history of hoodoo, the current resurgence of hoodoo, various spiritual practices that are based in hoodoo, how hoodoo is all around us every day, hoodoo in the church, and just hoodoo, 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 everything. Okay, let's get into it. So, hoodoo is an ancient African American religion. And a lot of people hear the word religion and they run from it because religion is usually associated with not so positive things and feelings. It's kind of almost associated with oppression, especially when dealing with Black households, specifically African American households, and really households across all cultures of color. Specifically, religion normally has a negative connotation because, again, it's associated with oppression. However, religion is just a set of practices that people follow in order to reach a goal, and that goal may be heaven or paradise or whatever you like to call it, right? And it also tells you what to avoid, almost like a guide of morals and values and how to practice those morals and values. That's what religion is. Well, hoodoo is an African American religion. It is a set of spiritual practices, morals, and values that help us achieve a certain goal, which is wellness, which is not just survival, but thriving, which is caring for our families and, venerating our ancestors, right? So hoodoo started in the South. It started when African people, our African ancestors, were brought over to be enslaved in America. In the South, they have this area called Charleston, South Carolina, and the Charleston port was one of the largest slave ports. So the most slaves that entered America came in through Charleston. In present day, around the Charleston area, you have a collective of people, a group of people, a tribe, some would say, called the Gullah Geechee, and they currently reside in what is known as the Gullah Islands. And the Gullah Islands have a variety of names, but as a whole, they're known as the Gullah Islands. I don't know if y'all remember the show back in the day, Gullah Island. Yes, it's a real thing. The Gullah people are known for currently present day still practicing hoodoo. So when African people were brought over to America to be enslaved, they brought over their languages, they brought over their cultures, and above all, they brought over their spiritual practices, their way of life, their religious practices, right? And of course, our ancestors came from a variety of areas in Africa. And when they were brought over to America, a lot of attempts were made to strip them of all culture. They didn't want them to be from Benin. They didn't want them to be from Togo. They didn't want them to be from Ghana. They didn't want them to be from Senegal and different places. They didn't want them to retain that culture and to retain their identity. They wanted them to forever and always think and believe that they were nothing more than property. And for this reason, they were stripped of or attempts were made, I should say, to strip them of their language and their culture and their spiritual practices. In addition, a lot of the reasons why the enslavers, the colonizers, the oppressors wanted to strip them of their culture and their language and practices was because they did not understand it and they feared it. They feared those practices. They feared that spirituality. They feared that language because they could not understand it. And their biggest fear was that these people could be gathering and planning a way to overthrow us, a way to take over, because it's more of them than it is of us, the colonizers. It was more Africans that were attempted to be enslaved than there were of the colonizers or the enslavers. So their biggest thing was, we need to strip them of everything, let them know that they are, make them believe they are nothing but property. And that way they will forever and always feel like they are not above us, they are beneath us. And that was the intention of trying to take away their identity, their culture, their practices. But many Africans did not allow that to happen. open. They did not allow that to go over. And that is where hoodoo was birthed. So hoodoo is a religion that was birthed from bravery. It was birthed from resilience. It was birthed from perseverance. It was birthed from our ancestors who were enslaved, and the attempts were made to strip them of everything that they knew, but they still dared to practice. They still dared to venerate or uplift and honor their ancestors. They still dared to call on certain energies and use the earth's natural environment in order to heal themselves and heal each other. They still dare to sing their songs and praise and uplift themselves and their spirits. They still dared to use these spiritual practices in order to be well, in order to be holistically well, regardless of their circumstances. And the reason that the hoodoo or these practices, these set of practices were done in secrecy is again because if they were caught speaking their languages, practicing these spiritual practices, they would be in trouble. There would be severe consequences that could sometimes lead to death. Okay, it could sometimes lead to death. So that is why our ancestors were so brave and so private, but yet so resilient to still carry on these traditions. And when I say traditions, I'm speaking of traditions from Benin, voodoo in Benin and Ghana. I'm speaking on traditions from the Dogon. I'm speaking on traditions from the Ifa and from various African religions that were brought over with our ancestors. So imagine our ancestors being transported here from various areas in Africa, and they practice Ifa back home, they practice voodoo back home, they practice Dogon back home, and they are all brought here to these areas in coastal South Carolina and coastal Georgia, and all they know is their religion. Yes, these colonizers or these oppressors are trying to force Christianity on them, but they know the power of their religion. They know the power of their spiritual practices. They know how it makes them feel. They know the intention of it, and they still want to maintain that. So what did they do? They practiced in secrecy. They shared language. They shared culture. They shared spiritual practices, and that is how hoodoo was birthed. So hoodoo is a combination of a bunch of African spiritual practices or spiritual practices that are based in Africa. And a lot of those spiritual practices are just familiar to Black folks because it's carried on from generation to generation to generation. Hoodoo is so ingrained in Black culture that a lot of Black folks are practicing hoodoo or saying hoodoo sayings and don't even know it, even in the church. Hoodoo is even in the church. So moving forward, I'm going to explain various hoodoo practices and how you may not know it, but you see it everywhere. Now, although Christianity itself is an African traditional religion, it was mainly practiced in East Africa during the 16th and 17th century. It wasn't as prominent in West Africa. So when our ancestors were brought over and they were enslaved, many of them were brought over from West Africa, and they were still practicing their own African traditional religions or other African traditional religions that were not Christianity. And that is why a lot of African Americans will say, Christianity was forced on our ancestors. It was forced on our ancestors because many of our ancestors came from West Africa where Christianity wasn't as prominent. And when they were brought over to be enslaved, they were forced to practice Christianity, and not necessarily the native or original form of Christianity. They were taught to practice the European or colonized version of Christianity, where essentially they were made to believe that or Christianity was used as the tool to make them believe that their masters or the colonizers were their masters. They were the people who were over them, and they should praise them and honor them, and to disrespect them was a sin. So Christianity, in a sense, was weaponized against African and our enslaved ancestors who were originally from West Africa and practicing their African traditional religions. And again, because the masters, the colonizers, the oppressors did not understand the African traditional religion, they feared what it could do to them. They tried to stop them, made several attempts to stop them from practicing what they knew. Therefore, our ancestors had to sneak their practices into the Christian church. They had to sneak their African traditional practices like voodoo and Dogon and Ifa into Christianity in order to covertly practice what they knew. So the black church as we know it today has a lot of sneak hoodoo practices that we don't even necessarily know are there. And I'm going to give you some examples. So of course we got to start with the ring shout. The ring shout is the practice where we gather in a circle and we shout and we sing and we praise and we dance with the intention of calling on certain energies. And we do that by giving praise and paying homage and singing songs in honor of whatever energy we are calling on. And that could be the energy of our ancestors. That could be the energy of the supreme being of God. That could be the energy of rain energy. We can be doing a rain shout and a ring shout. There can be multiple things, right? Multiple energies that we are calling on, but that is what the ring shout is. And during the ring shout, when you are calling on that energy, sometimes that energy can come in, and some people will use the term possess or take over a person, a living being. So they would get in the middle of the circle and they'll be praised, dancing and stomping and shouting and screaming, and they may be speaking in an undiscernible language, and that means that they have been possessed or the energy has taken over. Now, what does that look like today? Praise and worship and shouting and catching the Holy Ghost in the black church. And a lot of black churches, they you'll see them praising and shouting and dancing and singing songs and gathering together. And some folks may be running and jumping and shouting and catching the Holy Ghost. Another thing that comes from hoodoo is in the ring shout. When someone would be so taken over by the spirit or by the energy, they would fall out and then they would be covered with a sheet or covered with the blanket. And this was done during times of our ancestors being enslaved. This was done during that time because in case someone came over, like an overseer or the master came over, they would think that the person was just sleeping or resting. They would not think that the person was possessed by an energy, because if it was suspected that this person could have been taken over by a spirit, they feared that this person who was possessed or taken over by a spirit could hurt or harm them, so they would kill them. Therefore, they would cover the person who had been overcome and who had fallen out with a sheet, so it would appear as though they were just resting. So now, present day, when someone catches the Holy Ghost, they cover them with a sheet just to protect them and to cover them and to covet them. That is hoodoo. Smudging. I discussed in a previous video that I made on smudging about how smudging is an ancient African tradition, as well as a Native American tradition, as well as an Asian tradition, and so many different things. Like it's a universal cultural tradition where people will use resins and herbs and oils, and they would burn them with the intention of covering an entire area with smoke to call on a certain energy or to remove a certain energy. That is what smudging is. So our ancestors who practiced hoodoo or brought their practices over from Africa and created hoodoo, they also brought over smudging. So they would use whatever was available to them in their areas of Georgia and South Carolina in order to smudge and cleanse spaces. And that is still practiced today. As you can see, the resurgence of smudging is undeniable. They're selling sage and resins and things like that all over Amazon and in Walmart and in all kind of stores. Okay, they got it everywhere. So the resurgence of sage and all that stuff is prominent, but also sage and different herbs like frankincense and myrrh are burned in the Catholic Church. And in many black churches, they'll also still smudge and burn certain things in order to just, cleanse out the sacred space. And of course, y'all, we got to talk about that root work, that use of natural medicines in order to heal the body, in order to call on certain energies, in order to bring in certain energies and remove certain energies, to remove certain illnesses and ailments, or to bring in healing and to bring in prosperity and to bring in nutrients and various things into the body that can aid in our wellness, our holistic wellness. Root work is what we call it, okay? But it's just simply the use of just what grows from the ground and natural things around us, the use of the energy, the sun, the moon, the stars. All of that is involved in root work, and all of that is still practiced present day. Holistic medicine, herbal medicine is practiced present day all over the world, but specifically in America, it is practiced, okay? It is normalized in a sense, and you may not necessarily call it root work, but back in the day when somebody used to get sick and Big Mama used to cut up some ginger and throw some orange peels or throw some garlic and some onion and make a tea, okay, and tell you to drink this up, that was natural medicine. My granddaddy used to drink cod liver oil. Okay, cod liver oil, fish oil, okay, things like that in order to help heal the body. The act of using spirits or alcohol, taking a shot of gin every day. My granddad used to say, take a shot of gin every day to cleanse your system out, okay, to wake you up and cleanse your system. So he used to take a shot of gin every day, drinking certain herbal teas and all of that good stuff. All of that is natural medicine in order to heal the body, bring wellness into the body. I can go on and on and on of different examples. The use of turpentine. Okay, things like that. Now, turpentine ain't necessarily natural, you know what I'm saying? But just like those back home remedies, those old school throwback remedies, those things that you could just go grab out your backyard and go rub this on you, put some eucalyptus on you. I had posted that I was having an allergic reaction to a cat, and somebody was like, "Girl, you better take a bath with some eucalyptus oil." All of that is natural medicine, root work, and that is what our ancestors used. We bought that tradition from back home where, you know, when our ancestors were enslaved here in America, they couldn't afford to go to the doctors. They couldn't afford to get the medicine. So they would just use what could grow around them in order to heal themselves and heal each other. And those practices were incorporated in hoodoo. Another hoodoo practice that may sound familiar is a mojo bag. A mojo bag is a little bag or a purse or a pouch that many people would carry around their neck, or it would hang from their wrist, or they would just carry it on their shoulder and wear it like a purse or a briefcase. But these mojo bags contain some of those natural remedies, contain some of that root work, those root work tools that we could use and keep close to us and have handy. Now, in those mojo bags, it could be anything. It could be herbs. It could be some type of liquid or a tincture that was made. It could be spirits that could be used to make a tincture. It could be certain tools that could be used for suctioning, because also, y'all know how people use the suction cups and do the blood suctions and things like that to remove the impurities from the blood. That is an ancient African practice that we brought over. So you would find like different bones and shells that could be used for blood suctioning or suction cupping, right, to remove the impurities from the blood. So in those mojo bags, it could be anything. A good little mojo bag, a good little root worker bag, a good little pouch where we keep the hush secrets, okay? So a mojo bag will be carried around by hoodoo practitioners, and it was also a sign that someone was a hoodoo practitioner, that someone did know the work and was a root worker in a sense, and you could trust that person to have something on them that may cure any ailment or illness that you had. A mojo bag. Of course, we got to talk about bottle trees, y'all. Bottle trees are so popular down south, especially. You'll see bottle trees in people's front yard, and it's in certain stores. They'll keep them in the front of the store or on the inside threshold of the store. And bottle trees were used. It's a hoodoo practice, and it was used by our ancestors in order to capture and remove negative energies, right? So those bottles that would hang from the tree would contain certain herbs and certain elixirs, and it would be used to remove negative energy from a space. So a lot of people would keep them in their front yard in order to remove a certain energy. A lot of people would keep them in their front yard in order to attract certain energies, right? So essentially, every bottle on the tree would normally be rubbed down in a tincture, or it would have little herbs, a little bit of herbs inside of each bottle that would hang from the tree that could be used to capture negative energies. Almost how a dream catcher is used, but instead of it being a dream catcher, it is a bottle tree. Going to the water or to the crossroads crossroads to give honor and to pay homage to ancestors or call on a certain energy and to leave offerings at the water in the crossroads. That comes from African spirituality or African traditional religion. So, in the Christian church, a lot of people would get baptized in the water and cleansed in the water and things like that. We also had that tradition in a lot of African traditional religions like Ifa, right? Where you would go to the water and you would go to the crossroads in order to leave offerings, in order to call on certain energies, in order to be cleansed and purified. You would go to the water. So, we got in the Black church, we got the song, Take Me to the Water, right? And a lot of that comes from Hoodoo. It comes from African traditional religion. Now, one of my favorite hoodoo practices that a lot of Black folk practice and don't even realize is hoodoo is the act of a repast. A repast. So when someone passes away, you will have a burial and then you will have a repast. So the repast is when after the burial, Black folks will gather at a house and they will eat good and they will talk about the person who just passed away, who is now an ancestor. That comes from hoodoo. So back in the day when our ancestors were enslaved, they would have the traditional burial, the traditional sometimes Christian burial that the master may see sometimes, and then they would get together and they would have a repast. They would get together and have their sacred ceremonies and their sacred practices where they would eat and put out offerings and pay homage to the person who just passed away, to speak of them in an honoring way. So the repast is where we did our sacred work, our sacred thing in order to uplift and venerate this person who is now an ancestor. That is where repasts come from. So, when you go and you go to, when someone passes in your family and you have a burial and then you go to the repast after, that is a hoodoo practice. That is a hoodoo practice where we pay homage and we allow the ancestor to help this ancestor transition to the next level, right? That is where repasts come from. That is hoodoo. Now, I could go on and on and on about hoodoo practices that's all up and through African American or Black culture that we may not even realize. But, I'm just going to end with this. A lot of the superstitions that we follow, like don't sweep your feet. If somebody sweep your feet, you got to spit on the broom. That is a hoodoo practice. Things like, how the kids used to say, don't step on the crack, you break your mama back. That's because back in the day, our ancestors had a tradition of they would walk the straight and narrow path and they would say, don't you step on no cracks because you don't know what spirit lies there. You don't know what spirit lies in them cracks. That was a traditional hoodoo saying or hoodoo belief, a hoodoo way of thinking, right? So a lot of the superstitions that we live by and that, were just like fun little things that we would say, don't split the pole. Hoodoo, okay? Don't allow anything to come in between you and your beliefs, you and your practices, you and your tribe. We would stay together no matter what and walk in a straight line. That could also be a sign that somebody was on a mission. So sometimes we would send our warriors out to do missions and they would have to walk a straight line, okay? So they couldn't split the pole. That doesn't come from a negative thing. A lot of people try to bring it back to jail and prison and all that stuff. No, that is a hoodoo practice. So a lot of the superstitions that we have in African American culture that we just write off, like don't sweep the feet with the broom because it's bringing negative energy or it's bringing bad luck. Don't sweep when you sweep, you don't always sweep the dust out the door because you may sweep out your blessings. Okay, so you got to cleanse your space. Sweep up, cleanse your space first, and look through and make sure that you ain't cleaning out nothing that could be worth something, and then you sweep it out the door. Okay, blowing cinnamon through your door on a new month or a new day or a new moon, blowing cinnamon, putting coins and salt around the house. Okay, all of those is hoodoo practices that come from Africa. That is us. It is natural to us. So hoodoo is all up and through Black culture. It's all up and through African American culture. The idea of cleaning and cleansing your space is a hoodoo practice. When you cleanse and clean your space for the new year, a hoodoo practice. The use of rice and things like that in order to bless things and bless people. When people, how a lot of times in Black culture we throw rice. That is a hoodoo practice. Rice was seen as wealth. It was seen as a blessing. In Africa, as y'all know, and you can still see if you go to a lot of traditional African weddings today, they'll throw money. They'll throw their form of currency all over the bride and the groom. See, for us, currency was rice when we were enslaved. It was rice, especially in the coastal area of South Carolina and Georgia. Rice was the currency. A lot of people think cotton, 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 cotton when they think of slavery. For our Hoodoo ancestors, our Gullah people, rice was the form of currency. Rice was abundance for us. So we would throw rice on the bride and the groom. All of that is Hoodoo practices. So when you go to a wedding and you throw rice over the bride and groom, you are practicing Hoodoo, y'all. You're practicing Hoodoo. So whether you want to or not, we are, a lot of us, especially Black folks here in America, we are Hoodoo practitioners just naturally. It's all up and through you. Now, you may have noticed a resurgence of Hoodoo, or the popularity of Hoodoo being talked about in America today. You know, you got Hoodoo TikTok and all that stuff, right? So you see a lot of folks are transitioning back to Hoodoo, or naming things as Hoodoo. They're recognizing that Hoodoo is all up and through who they are. You know, a lot of Black folks are calling themselves Hoodoo practitioners, which again, we are all practicing Hoodoo in one way or another, whether we know it or not, you know. But a lot more folks are just putting a name on it and stamping it and saying, this is Hoodoo, I am a Hoodoo practitioner. And I think that that is such a beautiful thing. You know, thankfully, a lot of our ancestors kept these traditions going throughout the years. You have Zora Neale Hurston, who is a African-American author who was made popular for writing beautiful, beautiful stories about Hoodoo. And she carried on these traditions through her books. You have like Gullah Jack, who there's so many stories about Gullah Jack practicing Hoodoo and mojo bags and all that. You have Dr. Buzzard, who is a root worker that is very popularly known down south in the coastal regions of South Carolina and Georgia, and was known as a healer, Dr. Buzzard. So research Dr. Buzzard, research Gullah Jack, research Zora Neale Hurston. But these are just some of our ancestors who told these stories, because Hoodoo is very much an oral tradition. Thankfully, people like Zora Neale Hurston wrote certain remedies and certain practices, and she was able to pass on those traditions through her writings. But a lot of us just did what we saw a mama do, who saw what they mama do it, and saw their mama and their daddy and their uncle and granddaddy and cousins, and we just passed it on through oral tradition, right? So please, please, please know and pay homage and thank our ancestors for keeping these Hoodoo traditions going, because Hoodoo is ours. Again, Hoodoo is the African American religion. It is the African American traditional practice where we just took everything that we could from back home. When we were brought over to America, our ancestors took everything that they could from back home and preserved it as much as possible. They came together because they could not control where they were placed or who they were placed with. They could be from Benin and practicing voodoo and placed with someone who was from Nigeria and practicing Ifa, and they had to come together and share practices in order to maintain their collective wellness, because again, the goal was collective wellness. Each one teach one. We all trying to lift each other up. And with that being stated, Hoodoo is not necessarily a gate-kept practice, right? So we talk about gatekeeping. It's you know, gatekeeping is about keeping things a secret. It's about, you know, having things behind a gate where only certain people can practice it. Now, yes, Hoodoo is gate kept, or people practice gatekeeping by maintaining it as an African American tradition. Okay, an African American tradition. So it's basically Hoodoo is for Black folks. Hoodoo is for us. It's our thing, so it's gate kept in that way. But different from a lot of African traditional religions like Ifa, like Lukumi, or like Santeria, where there's not necessarily a traditional initiation process. Now, yes, you will have people, and what I had to learn over the years is that there may be family initiations, or like certain tribal initiations, especially for Gullah folks. You know, everybody just ain't doing the same thing. Everybody ain't a root worker in Hoodoo, and everybody ain't doing certain things in Hoodoo. You know, even when our ancestors were enslaved, you had certain women who were the root workers, certain women who would, you know, cast the spells, certain people who were Dr. Buzzard and would do the healings. Everybody did not do that. but it's not necessarily as strict as like Ifa, or as strict as Santeria, or as strict as Lukumi or Candomblé in Brazil. Like it's not as strict when it comes to like initiation and all that good stuff. So that's why I said Hoodoo is gate kept in a sense that it's for African Americans, but within the African American culture or Black culture, the initiation process is very a lot of people practice Hoodoo, and what you do and what you practice in Hoodoo is not as tightly gate kept. Now, again, in certain regions, especially in Gullah land, it certain things are gate kept, and everybody ain't practicing everything. And even if somebody does try to practice something, everybody ain't gonna go to that person, okay? Because you know that they might not know what they doing. They just out here doing stuff, you know. But yes, Hoodoo is just like a open, come one, come all for Black folks. You know, the whole goal that our ancestors had set was just, again, preserving their religion, preserving their spiritual practices, in order to preserve their wellness. They shared. Back then, they couldn't be like, oh, well, we're Ifa over here and we do this and y'all got to go over there because that's the voodoo side. No, 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 no. They shared what they could because the goal was intentional wellness. Now, if you want some resources of where you can see these things and how these traditions was practiced, again, research Dora Neale Hurston and read her various writings on Hoodoo. Research Dr. Buzzard and the stories of Dr. Buzzard if you want to learn about the mojo bags and the root work. Research Gullah Jack if you want to know more about different things within the Gullah culture and within, you know, Hoodoo, and about how, you know, Hoodoo was practiced amongst the Gullah people. And he was known for doing some things. Okay, so research Gullah Jack and research Dr. Buzzard and research Jordan Neale Hurston, but also watch movies like Sankofa. Sankofa, I believe, is currently available on Netflix. It's been available on YouTube for years. But in Sankofa, you will see various characters who practice Hoodoo. There's actually a character named Shango in the movie, which comes from Ifa. Shango is like the character who is a warrior, and he has some Hoodoo practices. In one scene, he's about to do some spell work in order to take down the oppressor or take down the master. Okay, so yes, watch the movie Sankofa. You can also see Hoodoo being practiced in a lot of movies and shows that talk about, you know, the slavery period, where you'll see them practicing a lot of natural medicine and a lot of root work. Look at the show. It's a show called Underground that you can see a lot of Hoodoo being done in the show Underground, especially I believe it was season 2 when the mother, she had got, you know, I don't want to tell the show, but in Underground in season 2, the mother gets moved and they start showing a lot more Hoodoo stuff when she gets moved to the other plantation. So watch the show Underground. I believe that's also available on one of these streaming services. Okay, so watch the show Underground. It used to be on WGN, but they canceled it, of course, when they started talking about Harriet Tubman and us being freed. Okay. But yes, you can see Hoodoo all throughout these shows and these films and writings and everywhere. So Hoodoo, again, it's not as gate kept as other African traditional religions. It is an African American traditional religion where we shared with each other because our goal, again, was collective wellness. Our intention was collective wellness. So if you desire to learn more about Hoodoo and to get into Hoodoo, please feel free to study and to research and to practice, because the intention is to keep these traditions going. I hope you are well, family. I'll see y'all soon. Much peace, much light, much love, much healing, and hoodoo, hoodoo, hoodoo. Get into it. I'll see y'all soon, family. Peace.